My daughter-in-law gave me a brand new smartphone for my birthday. Warm smile, wrapped in kindness. I took it to an old friend. He went pale. Take this to the police, now. 2 days later, I knew everything. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Ralph Dickinson. I'm 70 years old and I live in Scottsdale, Arizona, a place where the sun beats down like it has a personal grudge and the sunsets look almost too pretty to be real. I spent 30 years working insurance fraud investigations before I retired. In that time, I saw just about every way a human being can deceive another human being. I thought that had made me unshockable. I was wrong. I own a house on East Prickly Pear Road. 3 bedrooms, a good roof, saguaros along the back fence, assessed at $847,000 the last time anyone looked. I've got a 3-car garage where I keep my real treasures. A 1958 Harley-Davidson Duo Glide, a 1961 Sportster I'm slowly bringing back to life, and a 1955 Panhead that still runs better than most things half its age. I restore them myself. Taking something apart and rebuilding it properly is the most honest kind of work there is. You either understand the machine or you don't. There's no faking it. My pension is $3,200 a month, enough for a man who owns his house outright and whose main expenses are carburetor, gaskets, and good coffee. What I had not liked for 2 years was the situation inside my own home. My son Curtis is 42. He's a financial consultant, sharp with numbers, good in a room full of suits, carries my jaw and none of my patience. When he was small, he used to drag a step stool into the garage and watch me work on the bikes. He'd hand me tools without being asked, anticipating what I needed. That boy knew the difference between a flathead and a Phillips before he started first grade. I'm not sure exactly when that boy became the man living in my spare bedroom. It happened the way a tire goes flat. Not a blowout, just a slow, steady loss of pressure until one morning you're riding on the rim and wondering how long it's been that way. Curtis moved back into my house 26 months ago. The official reason was a transition period, following a career change. That transition period has no visible end date. He brought his wife with him. Nicole Dickinson is 38. She's an HR manager at a software company downtown, which means she has spent her entire career deciding who belongs and who doesn't, and she applies that framework to everything, including my kitchen. She's precise, organized, and not stupid. I want to be very clear about that. Stupid people are easy to manage. Nicole is the other kind. The shift happened slowly. Nicole began offering opinions about the house that weren't requests. The living room furniture was outdated. The garage was underutilized. My habit of keeping the back porch light on all night was wasteful. Each comment arrived wrapped in concern, delivered with a smile, and departed, leaving a small mark I couldn't quite see but somehow felt. Let me give you a specific example. About 8 months in, I came inside from the garage one evening and found my coffee maker gone. In its place was a newer model, sleek and digital, with a screen I didn't know how to read. I asked Nicole what happened to my old one. She said she'd donated it. She said I'd love the new one. She said it made better coffee. She had donated my coffee maker, a machine I'd owned for 11 years, without asking. I drank the new coffee. I said nothing. I filed it in the part of my brain trained over decades to hold things quietly until the right time. A shelf in my garage got cleared of parts I was using for a restoration and repurposed for Nicole's seasonal items. When I raised it, Curtis said they'd been trying to make better use of the space. When I pointed out whose space it was, there was a pause that lasted a beat too long. "Dad, we're just trying to help." That pause. I'd heard it thousands of times across interview tables. It's the pause of someone who has already decided the answer and is performing the act of considering it. My birthday arrived on a Thursday in summer. Curtis grilled steaks, which he does well. Nicole made a salad she described as heart-healthy, which I took as both a gift and a warning. My sister Linda drove in from Tempe, and we sat on the back porch, while the temperature dropped from brutal to merely warm. Then Nicole brought out the box, an iPhone 15 Pro, still sealed. Presented in that particular way people present expensive things, tilted slightly, label forward, with the quiet implication of expected gratitude. She'd been worried about my old phone, she said. It was already set up and ready to go. Curtis smiled and said it would help me stay connected. I thanked her. I held the box. I turned it over once. In 30 years of fraud work, I learned to notice the difference between a person having a feeling and a person performing one. Nicole's smile that evening was 2 degrees too wide. Curtis's had the fixed quality of a man waiting for a cue. The phone was still sealed, but a sealed box isn't ready to go. And there was a very faint ridge along the bottom edge of the plastic wrap, just barely there. The kind of thing a person who wasn't looking would never notice. I was looking. I set the box on the table, thanked them both, and said I was going to get some sleep. Linda caught my eye as I stood. She's always been able to read me, but said nothing. I lay in bed that night with the sealed box on my nightstand, staring at the ceiling fan, turning over a principle I'd held to my entire career. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Evidence comes later. The feeling comes first. I left the box unopened. The next morning, after Curtis had left for work and Nicole was on a call in the spare room, I picked up the box, walked out through the garage, past the Panhead, past the Sportster, past the old Duoglide that watched me go, got into my truck, and drove to a service center on McDowell Road without telling anyone where I was going. Vernon has run his repair shop on McDowell for a long time. He's a compact, methodical man who keeps his workbench the way a surgeon keeps an operating table and has a gift for finding things inside machines that shouldn't be there. I'd sent cases his way over the years when I needed technical analysis, tampered odometers, disabled dash cams, GPS units someone had tried to remove. He was never cheap and never wrong. I set the box on his counter, explained it was a gift that had been presented as already configured, and that I hadn't opened it. I didn't speculate further. I asked him to have a look. He opened it carefully, laid the phone on a clean white mat, and went to work. For about 15 minutes, I stood near the window and watched the traffic on McDowell, and let the silence settle around me. Then Vernon stopped moving. Not dramatically. He just stopped, the way a man stops when something requires a full moment of processing before anything else is possible. He sat very still, holding the phone, looking at his diagnostic screen. I watched the color go out of his face the way it drains from a sheet when you pull it off a bed. He set the phone down on the mat. "Ralph," he said, "tell me." He turned the screen so I could read it. 3 installed applications, none of them visible through the standard interface. One tracked GPS coordinates in real time and transmitted them at 5-minute intervals to an external server. One captured audio through the microphone and uploaded recordings every 6 hours. The third monitored screen content, everything typed, every app opened, and sent the data to the same server. The server address traced to a commercial proxy registered overseas. Vernon said quietly that someone had installed this before the phone was resealed. The work was deliberate, not casual. This required specific technical knowledge and, more to the point, a specific intention. He told me to take it to the police immediately. I asked if he could document what he'd found. He printed a technical report, signed it, and slipped his business card inside the folder. He said he'd speak with investigators if needed. I thanked him, put the phone back in the box, and drove home. This is the part people find hard to understand. I drove home. I walked through the front door. Nicole was in the kitchen making lunch and asked how my morning had been. I said I'd run some errands. She asked if I'd had a chance to try the new phone yet. I said I was going to set it up that afternoon. She seemed pleased. I went to the bedroom, plugged the phone into the charging cable on my nightstand, and left it there. Because here is what I mean precisely. The moment a subject knows they've been found out, they change their behavior. They destroy evidence. They coordinate. The most valuable window in any investigation is the gap between when you know something and when they know you know it. I wasn't ready to close that window. I want to tell you about a different morning, years back when Curtis was maybe 9 or 10. Early November, and we'd driven out to a swap meet east of town where someone was selling a box of old motorcycle parts, none of them labeled or cleaned. Curtis climbed out of the truck, walked straight to the box, and started sorting through it without being asked. He didn't know what most of the parts were. Bigger things on the left, smaller on the right, anything with visible markings in a separate pile. By the time I'd finished talking price, the box was organized well enough that I could see at a glance what we had. I remember thinking, this kid understands the work. Whatever it is that makes a person good at finding order in chaos, he has it. The boy who sorted those parts would not have put surveillance software on his father's phone. I didn't know yet, with certainty, whether Curtis had. I knew the phone had been in my house. I knew the installation was deliberate. I knew the data was being sent somewhere actively, and I had spent 30 years learning what to do with that kind of knowledge. The following morning, I drove to the Scottsdale Police Department on Goldfield Road before either of them was awake. The detective who came out to meet me was a compact woman named Simmons, the kind of person who has heard a great deal and learned to let it land without flinching. I set Vernon's report on the table between us. She read it without expression, asked several precise questions, and told me that the installation of surveillance software without an owner's knowledge or consent was a criminal violation under Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 13-3005. Depending on the technical findings, we could be looking at a felony charge. Then she said the words I'd expected. Attributing the installation to a specific individual would take time. She'd be in touch. I drove home through the late morning heat, the desert flat and bright on either side of the road, and somewhere in those empty miles, something settled in me. A shift, a counterbalance clicking into place. The police would handle what the police could handle. The rest was mine. That night I waited until the house was quiet, walked through the dark living room to the garage, and turned on the low work light above the panhead's bench. The bike sat there in its half-assembled state, patient and open, the way engines always are when they're waiting for someone who knows what they're doing. I pulled a yellow legal pad from the shelf, found a pen, sat down on my work stool. I'm not going to tell you yet what I wrote, but I'll tell you that the man who sat down on that stool was not the same man who had accepted a birthday gift and said thank you and gone quietly to bed. That man was still in there somewhere. He just wasn't in charge anymore. I want to be precise about what happened. In the 48 hours between the night I sat down in the garage with that legal pad and the morning I walked into the Scottsdale Police Department on Goldfield Road. I slept. I ate breakfast. I watched Nicole reorganize the utensil drawer with the concentrated attention of someone who believes deeply in the moral superiority of their silverware arrangement. I watched Curtis read the financial news on his laptop at my kitchen table, occasionally letting out the small, self-satisfied sound people make when the market confirms their existing opinions. I watched both of them and I thought, I've spent 30 years studying people who were trying to hide something. How did I miss this for 2 years? The answer, I knew, was that I hadn't wanted to see it. There's a particular blindness that comes with love, or what you believe is love. It's not stupidity. It's the eye deliberately looking somewhere else because the alternative is worse. I'd looked away from Curtis for 2 years because looking directly meant admitting what he'd become. I was done looking away. Detective Simmons worked out of a second-floor office with a window that looked onto a parking structure and apparently no awareness of this being a problem. She had the neat, unhurried manner of someone who has learned that most things resolve themselves into simpler shapes if you wait long enough. She read Vernon's technical report a second time before she said anything. "You understand what this means," she said. It wasn't a question. "Tell me what it means to you," I said. She looked at me with the mild, measuring expression people use when they're reassessing their assumptions about someone. Under ARS 13-3005, installing surveillance software on a device without the owner's knowledge is a criminal violation. Depending on what the investigation finds, we're looking at a Class 5 or Class 6 felony, interception of electronic communications, up to 2.5 years. How long will the investigation take? The technical attribution is the slow part. The server address is overseas, commercial proxy. We'll need to work backward from the installation itself. Could be weeks, could be longer. I nodded. I asked whether the phone should stay where it was. She said yes. If whoever installed the software thought it was still being used, they'd keep receiving data, which would extend the evidentiary record. She said it with the slightly careful tone of someone who isn't sure the civilian across from them will follow the reasoning. I told her the phone was on my nightstand, plugged in just as I'd left it. She wrote something down. Then she looked up and asked me directly whether I had any suspicion as to who was responsible. I had spent the previous 2 days thinking very carefully about this question. I have suspicions, I said. I don't have evidence. I'll let the investigation do its job. She studied me for another moment, then nodded. We shook hands. I drove home. Nicole was on the back porch when I came in, a glass of iced tea in one hand and her phone in the other. She glanced up. Where were you? Errands, I said. Needed a few things from the hardware store. I held up the small paper bag I'd stopped to collect on the way home. Spark plug wrenches, which I actually needed. The best misdirections are the ones that are true. She looked at the bag and then at me with the particular expression she used when she was calculating whether a piece of information was useful. I had started noticing that expression. I was noticing a lot of things I'd filed away without examining. The way she always angled her chair slightly toward the living room when she made phone calls from the porch, positioned to hear the front door without appearing to listen. The way Curtis would sometimes look at the ceiling mid-conversation, just briefly. The way people do when they're remembering a script rather than thinking of something new. The way both of them had developed over the preceding months, a gentle and persistent interest in my finances. Not direct, never direct, always wrapped in concern. Had I thought about updating my estate plan? Did I know that probate in Arizona could be complicated? Had I considered simplifying my assets? Looking back, it had the quality of a road being laid, one section at a time, leading somewhere neither of them had named out. Loud. My notepad from the night before was still in the garage. I'd written 3 words at the top of the first page. What do I have? Below that, 2 columns. One for facts I knew, one for things I needed to know. The facts column was longer than I'd expected. The needs column was longer than I'd hoped. That evening at dinner, Nicole asked again about the phone. Was I enjoying it? Was it easy to use? I told her it was the best phone I'd ever had. Clear signal, great camera. I was getting the hang of it. She smiled, that 2-degree too wide smile, and said she was glad. Curtis said nothing. He was eating with the slightly distant focus of a man whose mind is elsewhere, which is how Curtis looks when he's worried about something. I'd known that look since he was 12, and had broken the garage window with a baseball and spent 2 hours pretending he hadn't. I watched them both across my kitchen table and felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, exactly. Something quieter and more useful than anger. The specific settled clarity of a man who has decided what he's going to do and is simply waiting for the right moment to begin. The next morning I drove to the hardware store again, not for parts this time. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes with the legal pad and added 3 more items to the needs column. Then I drove home, went into the garage, and turned the page. At the top of page 2 I wrote, "Who do I call?" I underlined it twice. The subjects I dealt with in fraud work almost always made the same mistake. They assumed the size of the institution they were deceiving made them invisible. The insurance company had thousands of claims. Regional managers' quarterly targets, too big to notice one person. That was the logic. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't the institution. I was one person, moving slowly, with a list. I worked the same way now. The first call I made was to the Arizona State Bar Association's referral line. I asked for an estate planning attorney with experience in trust formation and elder law. They gave me 3 names. I read through their profiles, settled on a man named Garrett Ruiz, whose office was on the 5th floor of a building on Camelback Road, and made an appointment. $75 consultation deposit, paid by phone with my own credit card. I did not tell Curtis and Nicole I was doing any of this. This required a modest amount of theater. I left the house at normal times with plausible explanations. Hardware store, barber, breakfast with a friend. I came back with small props when useful, a receipt, a coffee cup. It felt faintly ridiculous for a man of 70 to be conducting reconnaissance in his own home. I held on to that feeling because it kept the edge on. Ruiz was a trim, unhurried man in his mid-50s who kept his office exactly as organized as you'd want your attorney's office to be. He did not waste time. I told him the situation in order: the surveillance software, the police report, 2 years of encroachment, my concern about the house. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked 4 questions, all precise. Then he pulled up the Maricopa County Recorder's database and ran a search on my address. He went quiet. "Mr. Dickinson," he said, "are you aware that a power of attorney application was filed approximately 5 weeks ago naming your son Curtis Dickinson as your agent?" I was not. "You didn't sign anything? Notarized documents?" "No." He turned the monitor so I could read the screen. My name. Curtis's name. A date 5 weeks prior. A notary stamp. "Is that stamp legitimate?" "That's one of the things we'll need to answer," he said, still writing. "In Arizona, a power of attorney requires the principal's signature in the presence of a notary. If you didn't sign this and that stamp was obtained fraudulently, we're looking at criminal exposure beyond the surveillance matter." He said it the way a doctor describes a test result. No drama, just the fact, placed in front of me. I paid his retainer that afternoon, $350 an hour, $2,000 minimum. Some expenses clarify themselves. The second call I made was to a licensed private investigator named Price, whose listing I'd found through a professional directory. His office was off Indian School Road. Direct man, somewhere around 50, who said the necessary thing and nothing extra. I told him I needed documentation. Daily movements, meetings, anything outside the ordinary. I gave him descriptions of both Curtis and Nicole, both vehicles, and the address. $800 a day, minimum 3-day engagement. I paid $2,800 as a deposit, and he said he'd have an initial report within the week. I drove home through the afternoon heat with the specific satisfaction of a process begun correctly. 2 weeks later, Ruiz confirmed what I'd already suspected. The power of attorney application had been formally annulled, voided, gone from the county record. Whatever Curtis had been planning to do with it, that particular door was now closed and bolted, and he didn't yet know it. I sat with that in the parking lot outside Ruiz's building for a few minutes. I thought about a man who'd spent 5 weeks believing he held a key to his father's life. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that key no longer fit. Ruiz had also mentioned, almost as a footnote, that the power of attorney wasn't the only instrument someone might use to take control of a person's assets. Living trusts, guardianship filings, joint tenancy reclassifications. A patient, organized person with legal support could attempt any of them. The surveillance software suddenly made more sense. They hadn't been listening to my conversations idly. They'd been waiting to learn something specific. Timing, finances, whether I'd been talking to anyone. I thought about the phone on my nightstand, still plugged in, still transmitting. Let them listen. That evening, Nicole appeared in the kitchen doorway while I was making coffee. "You've been going out a lot lately," she said, casual, perfectly calibrated. "Getting restless," I said. "Too much time in the garage," she smiled. "You should get out more. It's good for you." "You're probably right," I said. I took my coffee to the reading chair, opened a book I wasn't reading, and watched her over the top of the page as she walked back to the living room. I thought about everything I had done in those hours she hadn't been watching. The attorney, the investigator, the voided document, the locked box in the garage. She thought she was a step ahead. She had no idea I'd already lapped her. Nicole announced the family meeting on a Saturday morning. She picked her moment well. Curtis was home. I had nowhere obvious to be. And the weekend timing gave it the feel of something casual. She wanted us all to sit down together, she said, warm, measured tone. The kind people use when they've already decided the outcome and are managing the process toward it. I said that sounded fine. Before sitting down, I went to my bedroom and started a recording on an old digital recorder I'd kept in my desk drawer since my working days. Arizona allows recording of a conversation by any participant without notifying the others. I am a participant in every conversation that takes place in my house. I set the recorder in my shirt pocket, buttoned the flap, and went to the kitchen. Curtis was at the far end of the table with his coffee, positioned slightly back the way people sit when they want to signal presence, but not leadership. She was concerned, she said. I'd been forgetting things lately. The garage light I'd left on twice, the coffee on the burner, a doctor's appointment she was fairly sure I'd missed. The garage light I leave on deliberately when I'm going back out. The coffee I come back to when it's still warm, not forgotten, paused. As for the appointment, I had missed nothing, and she couldn't know my schedule because I'd stopped sharing it with her months ago. She was reading from a rehearsed list. The items were too evenly spaced, too cleanly ordered. I kept my face at a mild, slightly confused attentiveness, a man doing his best to follow. I just think, she said, and here she paused for the weight of it, that it might be time to think about having some more formal support in place. Someone who can help manage things. For your protection? What kind of support? I said. A guardian. An official one. She said it gently, like it was a gift. Someone with legal authority to help you make decisions. Curtis and I would be involved, of course. Curtis nodded at this and looked at the table. There it was. Guardianship. The word Ruiz had warned me about. In Arizona, a guardianship strips a person of the legal right to make their own decisions. Property, finances, medical care. It requires a court proceeding, but it can move faster than people expect when the paperwork is prepared in advance. And Nicole was not a woman who proceeded without paperwork. Then Curtis said he'd asked a friend to come by, a doctor he knew, just to chat, just to say hello, nothing formal. He said it with the ease of someone who had rehearsed the casual delivery many times. A man named Hargrove came in from the living room, where he had apparently been waiting. He was around 50, pleasant enough, with the slightly too relaxed manner of someone making a professional assessment while pretending not to. He shook my hand, and we talked for about 20 minutes. He asked me what month it was, what year, who the president was, whether I'd had any recent falls. He asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens. I got to 2. I am entirely capable of counting backward from 100 by sevens. I have done it correctly in my head every time I've practiced, since the age of 50. I said 100, then 93, then paused, furrowed my brow, said 80. No, wait, and trailed off with the look of a man suddenly unsure of the arithmetic. Hargrove wrote something on his notepad. I answered 3 more questions with the thoughtful hesitation of a man trying hard and not quite getting there. And then I said I was going to get some water and excuse myself from the table. In the kitchen I stood at the sink and ran the water and thought about the recorder in my pocket and thought, good, this is exactly what I needed. That evening I called Ruiz and told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment, then said to email him the recording. He'd review it and advise. He said that an informal evaluation by a non-treating physician in a private home setting, conducted without the subject's knowledge or consent, had no standing in an Arizona guardianship proceeding, but it was clearly preparatory. They were building a file. He said I should build a faster one. Over the following week, I did exactly that. I drove to my primary care physician, Dr. Anand Patel, who has seen me twice a year for 11 years and knows my baseline better than anyone. I explained that I needed a current cognitive and physical evaluation documented in full. He ran the standard assessments. I scored in the normal range for my age across every measure. He wrote a detailed clinical note and gave me a copy. I went to my Wells Fargo branch in Old Town and printed 6 months of statements. Current balance, $127,400, across checking and savings. No unusual activity, no missed payments, no evidence of the financial confusion a guardian is supposed to protect against. I put everything in the locked box in the garage. The box was getting heavy. Then Curtis, one evening after dinner, stepped onto the back porch and made a phone call. He stood near the far edge, facing the yard. I was in the kitchen with the window cracked for the breeze, and voices carry differently at night in the desert. Everything flattens out, and sound comes clean across still air. I heard him say, clearly and without question, "We need to move faster." A pause. "I know, but something's off. He's not acting right." Another pause. "Just do what we talked about. File it." He came back inside and poured himself a glass of water and didn't look at me once. Price delivered his report on a Tuesday. He drove to a coffee shop on Scottsdale Road, handed me a manila envelope across the table, drank half a cup of coffee, and left. He did not make small talk. He was worth every dollar. Inside the envelope were 12 days of documentation, photographs time-stamped, vehicle logs, a clean summary sheet. 3 items stood out. On 2 separate occasions, Nicole had met with a man named Whitfield at a real estate office on Kierland Commons. Price had photographed them through the office window, Nicole at a conference table, printouts spread between them. Whitfield was a licensed residential realtor specializing in Scottsdale properties. The subject of their meetings, homes in the $600,000 to $900,000 range. There was my house's assessed value, sitting in the center of that range like a bullseye. I looked at those photographs for a long time. Then I put them back in the envelope, put the envelope in my truck, and drove home. That same afternoon, Detective Simmons called. The technical forensics on the phone were complete. The surveillance applications had been traced to a specific installation event, a period of approximately 90 minutes, during which the device had been unsealed, accessed, and resealed. The server that received the data was a commercial proxy, as expected, but the authentication credentials used to set up the account had been linked to an email address. The email address had been created recently and used for nothing else, a single-purpose account. Simmons said they were continuing to work the attribution, but the forensic picture was clear. This was deliberate, professional, and targeted. She told me to continue not using the device. I said I would be in touch if anything changed on my end. That evening I made what I will acknowledge was a mistake. I have made very few of them in this story, and I want to be honest about the ones I did make because it matters. I got impatient, which is not something I'm generally prone to, but Nicole's neat, composed performance at that family meeting had lodged somewhere under my ribs, and I had not fully shaken it loose. We were at dinner. Curtis was telling a story about a client, the kind of story that isn't about the client at all, but about the teller's intelligence. Nicole was eating her salad with the focus of someone who has decided not to participate in the conversation. I watched her for a moment and then said, as if the thought had just occurred to me, that I'd noticed she'd been out quite a bit lately. I asked if she'd found anywhere interesting. She looked up. Her expression did not change. "Just running errands," she said. "I thought I saw your car near Kierland last week," I said. Casually, the way you mentioned a passing detail. A pause, very brief, maybe a second. And then, "Oh, probably. I had lunch with a friend near there." "Nice area," I said. "It is," she said, and went back to her salad. That was the entirety of it. No stumble, no tell, no unguarded moment. She was too careful, and I had moved too early, with too little, against someone who had already been maintaining a cover story for months. I had gotten impatient, and it had cost me nothing useful. Lesson relearned. I called Ruiz the next morning and told him I wanted to move forward on the living trust. We had discussed it as an option during our second meeting. A revocable living trust, naming me as trustee and my sister Linda as successor trustee, placing the house and relevant assets inside the trust structure. The key word is revocable. I could change it, adjust it, or dissolve it whenever I chose. But it would mean that the property could not be transferred, encumbered, or controlled by a guardian without specific court action, which would be visible, slow, and contested. My sister Linda is 66 and lives in Tempe, 3 years younger than me and steady as a fence post. I called her that evening and explained everything. The phone, the forged power of attorney, the guardianship play. She listened without interrupting and without dramatizing. "What do you need?" she said. "To be named as successor trustee on the house." "Done. Call Ruiz in the morning." I called Ruiz the next morning. 3 weeks later, the revocable living trust was executed, notarized, and recorded with Maricopa County. The house at 9145 East Prickly Pear Road now sat inside a legal structure that would require a judge's direct intervention to penetrate. The fraudulent power of attorney was already gone. The guardianship play had produced a documented recording and a medical evaluation that flatly contradicted it. I folded the trust document, put it in the lockbox, and sat in the garage for a few minutes in the quiet. I was building a wall, brick by brick, and they still didn't know the wall existed. The following evening I came inside after working on the panhead to find Nicole standing near the hallway, jacket in hand, keys on the counter. She looked at me with the expression she uses when she's recalibrating, something I'd started to recognize as the moment she shifted from one approach to another. "Good day," she said. "Fine," I said. "You?" She nodded slowly. Then she said, I found a card in your jacket when I was hanging it up. Ruiz Law. Is that someone you know? I held her gaze for exactly as long as felt natural. My estate attorney, I said. I've been meaning to update some paperwork. Just routine stuff. She smiled. Thin. Controlled. Of course, she said. Good to stay on top of those things. She picked up her keys and went to the bedroom, and I stood in the hallway and thought, there it is. She had the name now. She'd run it, find out what kind of law he practices, and whatever timeline she and Curtis had been working from was about to compress, which meant mine had to compress first. The morning after Nicole found Ruiz's card, she was careful. Too careful. The kind of careful that draws its own attention, like a person trying hard not to limp. She made coffee without offering any to me, which she always did. She answered a question I asked about the thermostat in one syllable, where she'd normally give me a paragraph about optimal cooling efficiency. Curtis left for work 40 minutes earlier than usual and didn't say goodbye. They were recalibrating, which meant I had a narrow window. I called Ruiz that morning and told him to move up the timeline. He asked how fast I meant. I said, as fast as you can without making errors. He said he'd have everything consolidated and ready by the end of the week. I said that would work. I spent the next 3 days in quiet preparation. I printed every document from Ruiz's office on a printer at a FedEx on Scottsdale Road. Not my home printer, which was connected to the household network. I organized them into a single manila folder in a specific order that I will describe in a moment. I reviewed Price's surveillance photographs one more time and selected 3 of the clearest. I printed those as well. On the 4th evening, I asked Curtis and Nicole to sit down with me after dinner. I put the manila folder on the table in front of me, closed, and waited for them to settle. They came in together. Nicole sat down with the posture of someone bracing for something unknown. Curtis pulled his chair slightly back. That same gesture from the family meeting, the one that signals presence without ownership. I'd seen it enough times to know what it meant. I let the silence run for about 10 seconds. 10 seconds of deliberate quiet at a table does more work than 2 minutes of preamble. Then I opened the folder. I want to show you a few things, I said. The first document I placed on the table was the Scottsdale Police Department case report. Case number, date received. Subject, unauthorized installation of surveillance software. ARS 13-3005. I slid it to the center of the table and smoothed it flat. Nicole's eyes moved to it and stopped. The phone you gave me for my birthday, I said. Vernon found 3 surveillance applications installed before the seal was resealed. GPS, microphone, screen monitoring, all transmitting to an external server. I paused. The police technical forensics confirmed it. The case is open. Curtis had gone very still. Not the performed stillness of someone trying to appear calm, the actual stillness of a person whose body has stopped responding while the brain catches up. The second document, a copy of the power of attorney application that had been filed with Maricopa County 5 weeks before our conversation, naming Curtis as my agent. Beside it, a 1-page letter from Ruiz confirming the application had been formally voided and removed from the county record. I watched Curtis's face. Something moved through it, quickly and then gone, that I recognized as the moment a person realizes the thing they thought was secret has been known for longer than they knew. It's not quite fear and not quite anger. It's the particular unpleasantness of being outpaced. You filed that without my signature, I said. Your name is on it. That's a separate matter that Ruiz has already documented with the county. Nicole had not moved. She was looking at the documents the way a person looks at something they're trying to understand the full dimensions of. The third item was the audio recording from the family meeting. I placed Price's small printed transcript next to my recorder, which I set on the table without turning on. They both knew what it was without explanation. Arizona law, one-party consent, I said. That conversation is documented in full, including Dr. Hargrove's visit. The fourth item was Price's surveillance photographs. Nicole and Whitfield at the Kierland Commons office, time-stamped, unmistakable. I laid them out in a small row. Nicole's jaw tightened. It was the first visible fracture in her composure, and it lasted about 2 seconds before she reassembled. She was good. I will give her that. The fifth item was the executed living trust document. The cover page with Ruiz's signature, the notary stamp, the Maricopa County recording seal. I placed it last, at the center of the arrangement. The house is an irrevocable living trust, I said. My name and my sister Linda's. It was recorded 3 weeks ago. It can't be transferred, encumbered, or placed under a guardianship without direct court intervention, which would be a lengthy, public, and well-documented process. I folded my hands on the table. I spent 30 years taking things apart to find out what was inside them, I said quietly. I wasn't in any hurry with you. Curtis started out to say something. I held up one hand, not aggressively, just a pause, and he stopped. You have 1 week, I said. Leave voluntarily, and this stays between us. The police matter is separate. I can't speak to that. But the civil side, the property side, 1 week. The silence that followed had a different texture than the one at the beginning. That first silence was mine. This one belonged to nobody. It was just the sound of two people understanding, at the same time, that the board they'd been playing on looked nothing like what they'd thought it looked like. Curtis's composure broke first. Not loudly. He's not that kind of man. Something structural went wrong behind his eyes, and he said my name in a voice I hadn't heard since he was a teenager, caught doing something he couldn't talk his way out of. Dad! 1 week, I said. Nicole said nothing. She was already calculating, sorting options the way she sorts everything, without waste. I watched her do it in real time. She wasn't done yet. I was right. They didn't leave. I didn't expect them to. People who have committed to a plan don't abandon it because of a setback. They adapt, regroup, and find another angle. That's not cynicism. It's just how motivated people behave when the stakes are high enough. And the stakes for Curtis and Nicole were a house worth $847,000. That's not a number you walk away from after one difficult evening at the kitchen table. 3 days after our conversation, a woman arrived at my front door in the late morning. She was in her 40s, professional, carrying a clipboard and a county ID badge. She introduced herself as an inspector from the Adult Protective Services Division of the Arizona Department of Economic Security. She said she'd received a report of a vulnerable adult in possible need of intervention. I invited her in. I want to be clear about this. I was not surprised. I had called Ruiz the morning after the table conversation and told him to prepare for exactly this. Ruiz had told me what to have ready. I had it ready. We sat in the living room. The inspector, her name was Flores, explained that the report described concerns about my cognitive state, my ability to manage finances independently, and my physical safety in the home. She was professional about it, not unkind. She was doing her job. I thanked her for coming and asked if I could show her some documents. I gave her the clinical evaluation from Dr. Patel, the full report, not a summary. Normal cognitive function across all standard measures for my age group. Orientation, memory, executive function, verbal fluency, all within range, signed, dated on his official letterhead. I gave her 6 months of Wells Fargo statements. Balance currently at $127,400 across checking and savings. No missed payments, no overdrafts, no unusual activity, clean as a whistle. I gave her Ruiz's letter confirming that I had retained legal counsel of my own choosing and had executed a valid revocable living trust. Evidence that I was not only capable of managing my affairs, but had been doing so actively and with professional guidance. Flores read through everything with the careful attention of someone who knows the difference between a legitimate report and a tactical one. When she finished, she looked up. "These are thorough," she said. "I had a feeling someone might file something," I said. She looked at me for a moment with the expression people get when they're reassessing a situation. Then she wrote several things on her clipboard, thanked me for my time, and left. The complaint was closed that afternoon. Ruiz confirmed it by end of day. That same evening my phone rang. It was Linda. My sister does not call me in the evening unless something has happened. She said Nicole had called her that afternoon. She said the call had started warmly. Nicole asking after Linda's health, mentioning that she and Curtis were concerned about me, that they'd noticed some things. She said Nicole had then, gradually and with considerable skill, suggested that Linda might want to think carefully about whether being named in my living trust was really in her best interest. She said Nicole had implied, without stating directly, that the current situation might become complicated for anyone associated with my legal affairs. In other words, Nicole had tried to threaten my sister into withdrawing from the trust. Did she say anything specific? I asked. She didn't have to, Linda said. She's good at suggesting things without saying them. Are you worried? A pause. Then, Ralph, I grew up in the same house you did. I've been handling people like that since before she was born? A brief silence. I recorded the call. I told her to send me the audio file and to let Ruiz know it existed. She said she already had. Ruiz apparently had been on Linda's list before I'd even thought to suggest it. I called Ruiz the following morning. He told me that, in his opinion, the call to Linda, depending on its precise content, could constitute witness tampering or intimidation, both of which would be relevant to the existing police investigation. He said he'd forwarded the audio to Detective Simmons with a formal note. Then he said, Ralph, I think it's time to serve the notice to quit. Under Arizona law, a notice to quit sets a 30-day clock. If the occupants haven't left at the end of that period, the property owner can file for a writ of restitution, a court order directing the county sheriff to remove them. Service has to be documented, in person or certified mail. I said to proceed. The notice was served on a Thursday morning while I was at the hardware store. Ruiz had a process server deliver it to both Curtis and Nicole separately, at the house. By the time I came home, the envelope was on the kitchen counter, opened. Nicole was in the bedroom with the door closed. Curtis was sitting at the kitchen table, and he looked, for the first time in all of this, like someone who was genuinely out of moves. His coffee was in front of him untouched. He was staring at the wall with the expression of a man doing arithmetic that isn't coming out right. I put my bag down and took a glass from the cabinet and filled it with water. 30 days, I said, not cruelly, just as a statement of fact. Curtis said nothing. I went to the garage and sat on my work stool and thought about the locked metal box on the shelf and the folder inside it and everything I'd assembled piece by piece over the preceding months. I thought about the day Curtis was 9 and sorted a box of parts into columns without being asked. Then my phone rang. It was Ruiz. Curtis retained his own attorney this afternoon, he said, a man named Teller, estate and property litigation. I thanked him and hung up. So, they weren't done after all, neither was I. Curtis's attorney was a man named Teller, Frederick Teller, estate and property litigation, offices on Camelback Road 2 miles from Ruiz. His letter arrived through Ruiz's office the week after the notice to quit was served. It was professional, measured, and precisely worded in the way that expensive letters are when someone wants plausible deniability about the threat inside them. The proposal, if I agreed to withdraw my cooperation with the ongoing police investigation and refrained from pursuing any civil claims related to the power of attorney filing, Curtis and Nicole would vacate the property within 60 days rather than 30, and both sides would walk away without further legal action. Ruiz read it to me over the phone. When he finished, there was a pause. Your call, he said. Tell him no, I said. The investigation is a state matter. I can't withdraw from a process I didn't initiate. The county attorney doesn't take instructions from me even if I wanted to give them, and I'm not trading anything for what I'm already legally entitled to. Ruiz said he'd draft the response. A second letter from Teller arrived about a week later. This one was more pointed. It suggested that the living trust had been executed under undue influence and might be subject to legal challenge. The argument was that I had been in a vulnerable state, that the people around me had raised legitimate concerns about my capacity, and that Ruiz had taken advantage of this to steer my decisions in a particular direction. I read that one twice, not because it worried me, but because I wanted to understand the thinking behind it. It was a last-ditch effort, an attempt to find a crack in the foundation by questioning the foundation itself. What Teller apparently hadn't factored in was that the foundation had been poured with reinforcement. The trust had been executed with a full documented cognitive evaluation on file. I had independent medical records confirming my capacity. I had 6 months of clean financial statements demonstrating competent management of my own affairs, and the entire process had been conducted by an attorney I had found and retained entirely on my own initiative, with no involvement from anyone named Dickinson. Ruiz handled the response in 48 hours. The trust stood. The challenge went nowhere. When the 30 days from the notice to quit expired without any movement out of the house, Ruiz filed for a writ of restitution with the Maricopa County Superior Court. The hearing was scheduled, held, and resolved in the span of about 20 minutes. The judge reviewed the documentation, the notice to quit, the proof of proper service, the property records, the trust instrument, and granted the writ without extended argument. The Maricopa County Sheriff's Office would enforce it on a court-specified date. Ruiz called me from outside the courthouse. "Done," he said. "They'll be out by the end of the month." In the days that followed, Curtis and Nicole began packing. Not efficiently, the stop-and-start quality of people doing something they've decided they're being forced into. I could hear them in the evenings, low back and forth of two people sorting through bad options. I stayed out of it entirely. I made my coffee, worked on the panhead, had dinner at Linda's on a Tuesday. She opened a bottle of sparkling cider, poured 2 glasses, said good, and we talked about other things. The morning of the court-ordered removal, a sheriff's deputy arrived at 8 o'clock. Polite, efficient, unhurried in the way of someone who has done this many times. He knocked, explained his purpose, and took up a position near the front of the property, while Curtis and Nicole brought their things out. I stood in the garage doorway and watched. Curtis made 2 trips with cardboard boxes and didn't look at me either time. He moved with the compressed, deliberate focus of a man holding himself together through sheer effort of will. He put the boxes in the trunk of his car and straightened up and looked at the street and didn't look back. Nicole made 4 trips. She was more controlled than Curtis. Surface smooth, movements precise. The expression of someone who has decided that composure is the only thing left worth keeping. 3 of her trips were through the front door with luggage and bags. The 4th was through the garage. I watched her come through. She had a rolling suitcase in one hand and something tucked under her other arm. I looked at what she was carrying. It was a fuel tank, the original factory tank from the 1955 Panhead, chrome and black, partially restored, a documented component of a registered collector vehicle. I had the title and the appraisal in the lockbox. That tank was worth somewhere around $23,500 as a collector piece, and considerably more as part of the complete bike. She had it tucked under her arm like it was a carry-on bag. "That's mine," I said. She didn't stop walking. "It was in a common area." "Nicole." I said her name the way I used to say a subject's name across an interview table. Not loud, not sharp, just present. Just, "I see exactly what you're doing. The deputy is at the end of the driveway." I walked out after her at an ordinary pace. "She's attempting to remove personal property," I told the deputy, "a documented component of a registered collector vehicle titled in my name." I had the registration number in my head. The deputy asked her to stop. She stopped. He asked her to set down what she was carrying. There was a moment, 5 seconds, maybe 6, where Nicole stood on my driveway in the early morning light with a $23,000 motorcycle tank under her arm, a suitcase at her side, and a Maricopa County Sheriff's deputy looking at her with the flat, patient expression of a man who has all day. I watched her face work through it. The calculation was still running, right up to the moment it wasn't. Then something shifted, some load-bearing thing behind the composure, the part that had been holding the whole structure up, and it gave way, not dramatically, not with tears or raised voices, just a very small collapse, visible only for a second, and then smoothed over and gone. She set the tank on the driveway, carefully, without a word. She picked up her suitcase and walked to the car. Curtis was already in the driver's seat. The engine started. The car backed out, pulled onto East Prickly Pear Road, and drove west. The deputy returned the tank to the garage bench, collected my signature on the vacate confirmation, and left. I stood in the driveway for a moment. The saguaros threw long shadows across the yard. Behind me, the garage was open, and the 3 bikes were visible in their row. The Duo Glide, the Sportster, and the Panhead, with its tank back where it belonged. In the desert in late autumn, after the heat finally breaks, you get a stillness that feels earned rather than empty. I thought briefly about 2 years of coffee makers and rearranged shelves, and a phone transmitting my location to a server overseas. Then I stopped thinking about all of it, because it was over. I went inside and made coffee in my own kitchen, in my own house, and nobody said a word about the cup. Several weeks later, on a weekday morning when the December air had finally cooled to something that felt like a season, Ruiz called with 2 items. The Maricopa County Attorney's Office had formally charged Nicole under ARS 13-3005, unlawful interception of electronic communications. The statute carried up to 18 months. She had accepted a plea agreement rather than go to trial, an $8,500 fine, 2 years of supervised probation, and a criminal conviction that would now follow her professionally for the rest of her working life. For someone whose entire career had been built on being the person trusted with sensitive personnel decisions, hiring, termination, access to confidential employee records. A conviction for illegal electronic surveillance had a particular quality of irony that I found quietly satisfying. She had spent 2 years monitoring me. She would spend the next 2 years being monitored by the state of Arizona. I thought about Nicole sitting across from an HR department somewhere down the road, in the chair she used to occupy on the other side of the table, watching the interviewer's face change as the background check came back. I felt something I can only describe as a very clean kind of justice. The second item, the civil claim against Curtis for the fraudulent power of attorney application, had settled. A document filed in my name, bearing a notary stamp I had never authorized, attempting to hand control of my finances and property to a man who had already decided what he would do with them. Curtis paid $14,200. He did not contest it. I wrote both numbers on the yellow legal pad from the garage shelf, added them up, noted the total, and put the pad away. Some things deserved to be recorded and then filed. The living trust remained in place, properly executed, properly recorded with Maricopa County. The house at 9145 East Prickly Pear Road sat inside a legal structure that would require significant, public, contested court action to penetrate. Linda remained named as successor trustee. She had accepted the responsibility with characteristic practicality and would carry it exactly as it deserved. Detective Simmons called the same week to let me know the case was formally closed on her end. She thanked me for my cooperation and said the documentation I had provided had been critical to the outcome. I thanked her and meant it. There's a particular satisfaction in watching a process work the way it was designed to work. No shortcuts, no drama, just each piece placed correctly until the structure holds. I also called Vernon. I owed him that. I told him what had happened, in broad terms. He was quiet for a moment, and then said, "Good." Well, he didn't need the details. He'd seen enough in that 20 minutes at his workbench to understand the shape of the thing. Linda came by for dinner the following Saturday. She brought a pie, pecan from a bakery she knows in Tempe, and we sat at the round oak table in the kitchen and ate it and talked about other things entirely. The bikes, a road trip she was thinking about, whether I'd considered finally painting the guest room a different color. Normal conversation, the kind that fills a house back up after it's been emptied of the wrong things. I thought sometimes, in the weeks that followed, about the 9 months between the birthday dinner and that phone call from Ruiz, the legal pad in the garage, the locked metal box that kept getting heavier, Ruiz on the 5th floor of the Camelback Road building, Price in the strip mall off Indian School, Simmons in the 2nd floor office with the parking structure view, the specific careful work of building something strong enough to hold. I had spent 30 years building cases that way, piece by piece, document by document, without announcing the structure until it was fully load-bearing. I never telegraphed a move before I had the documentation to back it up. I never confronted someone before I knew more than they thought I did. That discipline had served me well in a career, and it had served me well here. I had done it again. The only difference was that this time I had built it around my own house to protect the things that actually mattered. That evening I went to the garage. The 1955 Panhead had been waiting patiently on the carburetor for weeks. I'd been putting it off through everything that had happened, and it had sat there without complaint, which is one of the things I appreciate about machines. They don't hold it against you. I pulled the carb now, laid the components out on the white mat in the sequence I'd need them, and got to work. Main jet, needle, float bowl, accelerator pump, 30-year-old technology that still made complete sense if you understood what each piece was for and what happened when one of them stopped doing its job. The iPhone sat on the shelf above the bench. I had not thrown it away. It had arrived in this house as a trap and become something more useful than that. Evidence, catalyst, the thing that started everything in motion. Vernon had gone pale and said, "Take it to the police." And I had done that, and then I had done everything else. Sometimes the thing someone sets against you turns out to be the most useful thing they ever gave you. I had learned that particular lesson before, in other situations, but it bears repeating. The light over the bench was warm and steady. Outside, the desert had gone fully dark, and the temperature had dropped into the 50s, which in Scottsdale passes for a genuine December. The garage smelled like oil and metal, and the particular clean air smell of the desert at night. Dry and faintly mineral, the smell of a place that has been around long enough not to need anything from you. I worked the residue from the float bowl passage with a clean brush, taking my time. The Duoglide stood in its corner, the Sportster in its. The panhead sat open and patient under the bench light, the way machines sit when they're waiting for someone who knows what they're doing. I had been taking things apart and putting them back together correctly for 50 years. I knew what I was doing. The house behind me was quiet. It was mine. That was enough. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.